Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to my Family Office TV. I hope some of you are joining us live, and some of you may hear this after the fact. Nothing beats live because you hear it in the moment, especially today's podcast, and you could interact. I'm also the founder and CEO of SFO Continuity, a private membership club dedicated exclusively to families of wealth and family offices. I will intertwine some of that because today's conversation is going to actually be integral to a little bit of some of the solutions to a lot of the challenges that we're going to bring up today. So this is, and I'm not a negative person, we're going to take the positive road as much as we could, but this is one of my favorite topics: predicting and flying in front of Black Swan events. The subtitle is actually even more descriptive: thinking the unthinkable and unknowable to reduce risk, create opportunity, using wargaming and alternative futures. I'm going to do a little bit more of a formal open in today's session than I normally do. We'd get right into introducing the guest for the most part and get right to it. But I think this one is going to need a little more context than most. And by the way, the person I'll be interviewing, Michael Irish, founder and chief wargaming architect of SedoGravitas Partners. Our special guest today talks about techniques that have been used for decades in militaries and governments and can be used by the private sector and family offices to anticipate and prepare for and even profit from Black Swan events. We're going to pay particular attention, but actually go way more than this, into shifts in global balance of political militaries, economic power, Western paradigms, to hybrid authoritarianism, kleptocracy, and the rise of non-state actors. The rapid and archaic escalation in AI and what its implications may be. I just got off of Zoom about 2 hours ago. Wow, it's both better, more powerful, and advancing faster than I thought, and really scary in a lot of other ways. And thirdly, as a core anchor in how we break this up, cyber warfare, quantum computing, and how do you like this one? The safety and security of the planet's secrets. And now how this may all converge into what history may see as the ultimate Black Swan event. Even as we're doing this live and recording it in relatively late May, in the last week, so much has happened that we need to also integrate that relates to kind of this story. So a couple of years ago, to give a little bit of context, early during COVID, my largest relationship, which is a well-known brand, very high up in the Forbes food chain, why don't we call it that, reached out to me. And that led me to do a consultative assignment that would become also one of my one day to be released masterclasses called Sovereign Risk and Disaster Preparedness. And I immersed my life in that, from government to military to traveling the world and talking to amazing families and realizing how fragile much of this actually is. I think the families, to a degree, are beginning to understand it. My concern is maybe that the non-family member executives look past it as it has a small chance of happening, but I'm not going to worry about it. But there are opportunities within it. And also, since continuity is the most important aspect for the family generationally, you have to look at, does something have a small likelihood of happening, but the consequences of what might happen could be dire. So some of this takes us back to someone that I've been pontificating about for 15 years. And in 2009, I briefly interviewed him at one of my events when I was the founder. Well, you're always the founder, but the acting CEO relatively early on in my family office association. And that would be Nassim, or Nicholas Nassim Taleb. We'll just call him Taleb. We all know his great work from The Black Swan and other incredible books. And he talks about in that seminal work, the unpredictable, the unknowable, and that maybe the unimaginable could be better managed. He spoke about how most people are fragile, then you become resistant, but to truly absorb shocks and profit, you need to be anti-fragile. I've been on in the consulting work that I do an anti-fragile kick for over 15 years. And I tell you, I don't know if it's possible, but there may be times in certain circumstances where the family, a combination through competence and capability and the ability to adapt and be fluid, they're able to make a good run at it. But it's something effectively that you're always working on. Before I more formally say welcome, Michael, to the show, the planet has multiple open wars in Europe and the Middle East, dramatic political, military, and economic shifts, the ambiguity of the upcoming US elections, and a global trend that is getting more complex. And what this could mean is a long-term shift away from Western thinking to a less democratic model led by China, Russia, and I could broadly say their satellites. So on that note, buckle up. This is going to be an intriguing hour and a half to 2 hours. About halfway through, we'll probably take about a 90-second to 2-minute break where I may actually do a recap, but if you wanted to stretch your legs, those of you that are live, that would be a good opportunity to do that. Now, again, at the end of the day, this is not to scare you. It's to just confront reality and look at it from how do I hedge and mitigate risk? And importantly, there will absolutely be opportunities for your family to be in terms of continuity, but also in opportunity. Now, some of that, me and Michael at the end of our conversation will dive into how there's ways to engage with us with the limited amount of time that we have. Now that we're heading into the summer, Michael has a very active schedule. I'm taking no personal travel. Well, maybe a weekend or two in Wyoming. You can't hold that against me. I have a lot of things going on, including some consulting assignments. So on that note, our special guest, Michael Irish, is the founder, as I noted, of SedoGravitas. He has over 20 years of experience in management consulting, technology, strategy, decision-making, healthcare, longevity, and national security. I could go on and on. He has an incredible background. This is a subject I have some level of fluidity in, and Michael is absolutely one of the go-to people on these issues here in North America and around the world. So it doesn't matter where you're listening to this or watching it from. I don't care where you are. If you're concerned about the future, if you want to kind of see around corners, which is one of the things that I talk about in a lot of my master classes. So we're very fortunate. Michael, that was a little bit of an overly long wind up, but I think today it was needed. Michael Irish, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angelo. I don't think it's any longer than my wind up would have been, given some of your guests and the likes of Nick Taleb and others. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to try and keep this as intellectually entertaining as we can. And to actually let the audience know before we delve into some of the more perhaps darker themes that we're going to touch on, that the good news is that if there was no hope, if there was no good news, we probably wouldn't be doing this broadcast. There is good news, there is hope, there is optimism. And I would start out by observing one thing, which is trying to figure out what the future could be in the face of perhaps catastrophe. If you go back to before the Second World War, at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, which I had the opportunity many, many years ago to spend a lot of time at over the summer doing war games, Admiral Nimitz, who would later go on to command the Pacific Fleet, basically said, it's on record in writing, and I've seen some of the letters that he wrote, that the way that the war in the Pacific was successfully won was through the use of wargaming to do their level best to anticipate, predict, and model out what the future could hold in a war in the Pacific. That was an interesting time. The only thing that was not actually accurately forecast was the use of the kamikazes. And the reason for that was actually cross-cultural discontinuity between the Japanese and the Americans. Where we find ourselves today is you've got the confluence of multiple regional wars, which have global implications, whether it's because of the media, social networking, or other variables, or interdependent economies. But the net is that everything is connected. And so whether it's only in the Middle East, or whether it's in Ukraine, or whether it's potentially the Asia Pacific theater, everything is interdependent. And what we have the opportunity to do, and that's not only, geographic and military and economic issues. If we take a look at, artificial intelligence, if we take a look at cyber, and then put all that together in one bucket together with, quantum computing, these are really seriously interesting times. And if we don't navigate it with a little bit more presence and a little bit more prescience, we're going to lose control. Now, I think that the trend lines in AI, cyber, geopolitical conflict, these are not really impossible to figure out that they were going to happen. It was a matter of timing. But the confluence between an election in the US, geopolitical instability, and technology trends is a grand challenge. Francis Fukuyama, I'm not sure if he's been a guest on your show or not, Angelo, but
Unfortunately, not yet.
well, I'm not sure when he's going to want to actually. I'm sure he would welcome an invitation, but he wrote a book in '92 that I read with eagerness that was entitled "The End of History," and I found the book to be amazingly optimistic because it basically posited in the book that history, as it stood as a conflict between the East and West, or between the Soviet model and the Western model, we could basically hand the torch off to the Western model as having won. Then, back in 2022, he also declared that, and this is not a personal observation about him as an individual, because a lot of other people said it, but he said in 2022 that the Russians were losing the war with Ukraine and it was all over. And then you contrast that with the issue of foreign affairs that was published back in October of 22 as well, by and where it said, effectively, this is the beginning of history, and this is the era of uncertainty. And that was one of the reasons why we put SedoGravitas together. So it's a pleasure to be here, Angelo. I know you have some really awesome questions that you forewarned me about. So I hope to make this time useful for you and for the viewers as well.
Although not everything, there'll always be some surprises. I hope with our audience, and please, if you're able to, in our platforms, be able to comment and ask questions, that's always appreciated, because we got such incredibly smart people. You make my job easier and you make me look better. So bring those questions on. I'm going to start with, and it's going to sound a little off topic. I don't think it is. And that's with the iconic FT Marinetti. So I'm going to quote him. I urge you to get to work with all your heart, resolute on being bolder, crazier, more advanced, surprising, eccentric. I urge you to be a madman, he states. Cultivate a profound, indefeatable courage. The jungle is starved for lions. Michael, my question to you, does America have enough lions?
I think, do we have enough lions that are properly informed might be an alternate question, Angelo. I think that we have enough lions, and historically, I think we've proven that to people who have underestimated us. I think the question that we have to ask ourselves today, with what seems to me, as a casual observer, but one who does read periodically, there's a divide in the perception of reality in this country. And so the lions that we have see, half of them see reality one way and the other half see reality a different way. The public sector sees a lot of things differently than the private sector, and I work with both, as do you. But I think right now, do we have enough lions? Yeah, I think we have enough lions, but I don't think the lions are eating the same, food. And I don't think they're kind of perceiving reality in the same way. So I think that as we take a look at risk from information operations, information warfare, deception, and deep fakes, I'm not talking about the genteel ones like, using Scarlett Johansson's voice, if that is the case, right? Or superimposing someone's face onto something which is satirical. I'm talking about where nation states and non-nation state actors are actually deliberately working to influence perception, and that perception dictates reality. And if you have a divided country, first of all, with two completely polarized views of reality, as we're really frankly seeing since October 7th, which is disturbing in and of itself, if the lions don't have a common direction, a common vector, and a common reference point, I think we have some really egregious problems, and I'm not really sure how we fix those. If you take a look at the internet and the amount of disinformation that's on it, not necessarily all malevolent, but I mean, certainly a lot of it is just sloppiness. A lot of content which is out there is garbage, and AI is not going to help that. And then you layer on top the fact that there are nation states who really truly believe that if you can influence the hearts and minds of the lions that you talk about, and you can divide them and you have them going in separate directions, that's the ultimate takedown of a lion. So I guess to your question, do we have enough lions? Yeah. Do we have lions that see reality the same way? I think that's a different issue.
Talking about decision making, it's been said you have to go into the thicket of ambiguity and suffer there for a while, and then you come out the other side. What does that statement mean to you in the context of what we're talking about today?
I appreciate the question, first of all. For a few decades, 2 or 3 decades, the ability to tolerate risk as it relates to ambivalence, especially in the military or other universes that parallel the military, that ability to tolerate ambiguity is what's going to keep you alive. If everything has to be neatly packaged in black and white, and your enemy, whether it's an internal enemy or whether it's an external enemy, whether it's information or physical, or perception driven, right? If you cannot accept the fact that nothing is perfect and nothing's 100% or 99%, then it's going to be really, really hard now and certainly in the future, because the volume of information is growing. The divergence of information seems to be increasing. People don't seem to be elastic enough to try and get inside of other people's heads. Rather, folks seem to be doubling down in the righteousness and the merit of what they already believe, and then get into the trap of confirmation bias and mirror imaging. Mirror imaging, loosely defined, is when you project onto others your own fundamental belief system and perception of reality. And that's happening all over the place. Why can't that other person understand the way I feel or the way I think or the way I act? So, Angelo, to your question, ambiguity is increasing. The speed and depth of that ambiguity, the crevice, if you will, the gap, the chasm, is growing. And if we don't find a way to basically kind of find things in common, like, do we all eat? Do we all ambulate? Do we sleep? It's going to get back to the ultra fundamentals here, because right now I just don't see a lot of cohesion, which is feeding the ambiguity. So do we have to have a tolerance for ambiguity? Absolutely. Does that need to be increased? Absolutely. Can we get rid of some of the ambiguity by actually agreeing that some of us do things in common? Whether it's this country internally or whether it's our relationships with other countries, we've got to do better at that.
I'm trying to see how I could phrase my question and looking at it from a successful entrepreneur, a family office, or an executive in a family office perspective. How do you process information? How do you make a decision effectively? How do you think for yourself? You used a word that triggered me when you said a bias or a confirmation bias. No matter how smart we are, actually maybe more so because we became sold on our past perception and reality of success, that's always going to continue. So this relates to Taleb on going from being resilient to being anti-fragile. This relates to the work of General Stanley McChrystal and others that have spoken about how that seminal work by Taleb helped to shape their leadership and the decisions they make in the moment of battle. I'm trying to think of an actual question after I set the context of it, but I think you get the big picture. Do we get too rigid? Do we get too anchored? And how do we become better at adapting?
Right. And I think there's a lot of components to your question, and I respect it. I think that the first thing that you have to do is recognize that, you know, during COVID, which was not a particularly pleasant time for me or for my company, we had to go through 4 different corporate pivots, and that was really a challenge. And every time we had a business model and a business plan and felt that this is what the market, not only needed, but that we were going to be able to service it, something else would change, whether it was, medical reimbursement rates, or whether it was the fact that we couldn't launch a new product because we couldn't actually get into our test sites physically to test our product. And it goes on, or the pure, political bureaucracy. And so I have some experience, albeit not pleasurable, in pivoting and constantly readjusting your set of assumptions. With the pace and rate of change today, look, before October 7th, before 9/11, before COVID, we all had this really, terra firma interpretation of reality as we understood it then, and then everything changed. And so in looking at black swans, which are them and of themselves, events that are not supposed to be predictable, I think that the one thing which is predictable is that we're living in one black swan after another. And if we don't use our creativity to try and figure out what some of those black swans may be, or black swans all getting together, I think we're really in dire straits. And I said I would keep this optimistic. Every time we have a conflict, every time there's a problem in the world, there's a way to optimize that. You either go short, you go long on something, or you do both. You make a market in one area while subtly divesting from another. One of the things that I was laughing about as I prepared for being interviewed by you, Angelo, was an old episode of Star Trek, the original one from a really long time ago, came on. And what occurred to me is that oftentimes the greatest realists are the people who are making stuff up or think that they're making stuff up. And whether it's the end of poverty or space travel or a million other things, sometimes it's the ultimate futurist who's also the ultimate realist, is somebody who's thinking so out of the box that you think it's unimaginable. And I had the opportunity to do one lengthy meeting for another country that's aligned with the U.S. by and where we had people from all over the world, from the national security and futurist universe, right? And I was trying to figure out who a few people were. Well, they all turned out to be fairly successful, either science fiction writers or science fiction film producers, right? And oddly enough, if I look back, 10 plus years on who was actually really the most accurate insofar as futurism and taking a look at what was next, it was actually the science fiction team.
Mm-hmm. Not a surprise.
Go on. I'm sorry, Angela.
Oh, not a surprise to me.
No, what is a surprise, and they'll remain nameless, was I was going back and forth with one of these individuals that I've maintained a friendship with for quite some time. And what they found disconcerting to them in writing books that are supposed to be fictitious and science fiction was that they said, I'm getting leapfrogged by reality, so that I'm actually not looking like it's science fiction, that the genre is being compromised. And I think that we need to look at, the fact that things are moving so quickly. Do we have the cognitive capacity, the psychological capacity? Do we have the policymaking, governance capacity, and international collaboration capacity to work together on some of these grand challenges for the planet? I'd submit to you that a lot needs to be done in these areas. And I'll pause there.
No, that's fantastic. Yes, a lot needs to be done. This is a subject, perhaps each question, that I could literally go 20, 30, 40 minutes with, Michael. But long enough my podcasts are already. we do have to keep things going, but we will have a break here and there. And at the end, we're going to kind of tie this together. What I will say about what Michael said, having been in the world of great wealth and billionaires and family offices for years, it's very insular, it's very siloed, and that's really bad. There's a lot of problems in the family office, quote unquote, community. And what you said about kind of the futurists, the scientists, meaning scientific writers and fiction, you need to shake things up or you just get groupthink. And that's a big, big problem within the family office. You need, and my audience knows I talk about, you need to be a historian. What happened during the English Reformation, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, Nazi Germany? We all know what happened to the super rich, and it wasn't good. But you also need to be a revolutionary. You need to see around corners. You need to have different perspectives that you take in, and then you make a decision. And too much of it is anchored, using that word, in groupthink in the community. And this is sometimes what gets me in a little bit of trouble by the old guard, which I think I'm one of the old guard. I'm old and I've been around in the community a long, long time, but they're just so linear in their decisions. From the Green Beret Handbook, How to Overthrow a Country. And I've had multiple military, Navy SEAL, and Green Berets on in the past. They all probably disavow any knowledge of the so-called handbook, sure. But there is somewhat of a so-called handbook in terms of overthrowing a country. Now, we're going to get to a movie that came out, I think, about 6 months ago in a little while that relates to some of that. But it talks about divide the people, infiltrate institutions like education. So I guess, Michael, my question for you, reversing that, have our enemies learned all too well, and now we're the ones in the crosshairs?
Well, let me answer that two ways. I think a lot of the crosshairs that we have are self-inflicted insofar as that relationship that you describe. I think a lot of our problems are self-created, number one. I don't think it takes an enemy right now meticulously taking the US apart, because we're doing a pretty good job of it right now, which goes back to my earlier point, which is, if I'm an Eagle Scout, right? And I was also a Marine. If I had half of my Boy Scout patrol saying we're going to go this way because we're absolutely right, and the other half saying we're going to absolutely go that way because we're absolutely right, the same thing with, being a Force Recon Marine, I don't think we would have actually probably managed to get very far, and certainly wouldn't have accomplished the mission. There's a couple things to think about, is that until we can actually recognize that we don't have an ability to navigate through chaos unless we actually acknowledge its existence. And you referenced the Green Beret Handbook. That was a handbook which was originally authored well before we had information operations and information warfare, deception, deepfakes, and things of that nature. In my library, there's a couple books. And some of the folks in the audience are probably going to remember it. They're kind of old. But I'm also kind of old too, because I still read physical books. But one is called How to Steal the Network. Sorry, full disclaimer here, Angelo. One is called How to Steal the Network. The other one is called How to Steal a Country. And that's all about, the convergence of cyber and taking down information systems, whether it's a company or whether it's a country or whether it's the planet. Half the space assets today are commercial. Many of those space assets, in the thousands, have bleed over into the governments of many countries, ours just being one. And many of you in the audience, I'm sure, know precisely what I'm referring to, but I'm not going to use any of the names there. But I mean, if you take a look at, the privatization of things that used to be the sole domain of the defense and national security infrastructure, whether in this country or others, and the increasing influence of non-state actors, both friendly and hostile to our national security interests and those of our allies, it becomes a much more complicated and delicate world. And ultimately, at the end of the day, anybody who's running a company, and I'm on company 4 who also has to be a capitalist, as I'm not running a not-for-profit or a nonprofit, to make money ethically may be something that some folks may not want to do. And so I think that going back to the notion of taking down a country, well, the country right now is at risk. And for all intents and purposes, if one considers attacks against our information systems, we are at war, both with state actors and non-state actors. And that's not going to decrease. Tampering in our elections is the holy grail of this country having any influence over its own destiny. And whether you like it or not, Politico, the New York Times, The Economist, a number of different outlets have very, very delineated discussions on how information is being used against us as opposed to being used to help us. And I think you can ask yourself the question, whose crosshairs are we in? And are we doing enough to inform the general public on the fact that, there's a number of different mediums that are looking to increase contact and mind share that may be, for example, a purveyor of music or funny Kit Kat videos as the like, I mean, the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of things out there that are legitimate problems. And once we start going and knowing, and we have, DNA on it, that people are overtly trying to tamper with our elections, tamper with our ability to conduct foreign policy, there's a lot more thinking that we need to be doing. And I think that I know several of the people that are in the audience, I don't know the preponderance of it, but, we always try to figure out how to make things better. At least most of the people that I invited here today do. I think that one of the first things that we need to do is be smarter about how we're actually holding our government, whether in this country or other countries, accountable. And are they actually doing what they're supposed to be doing as it relates to not only taking a look at what the environment is, but actually trying to figure out, I'm not a huge advocate of regulation, but what I am an advocate of is moving forward smartly. And total anarchy and things that matter to the future of humanity is not a good place to be. And allowing the public to believe one thing that was generated thousands of miles away and is having efficacy here in our domestic affairs is not something we should take lightly. But until our political leadership, whether it doesn't matter if it's at the state level or at the federal level, need to actually start doing the jobs to which we're actually paying them to do. And I'm not sure, based on the amount of legislation that's been passed, executive orders or anything else, that the governance and the management of the country is actually something which is forefront for a lot of individuals. And therefore, what can we do as business people? What can we do as people who want to make things better? That is to start holding our politicians accountable for things that matter.
And Michael, when you said in terms of the elections being interfered with due respect, and let's go a little back and forth, that started to happen, I hear people say 2016. Really? That's happened well before then. We've also done in the US more of our fair share around the world. But could I make the argument the French back with George Washington, our first president, they probably had a little bit of a level of influence and what's the word? I don't know if I'd use the word deceit, but what I'm trying to say is this goes back to the founding of our country.
Sure. I don't think it's a new tactic. I think that what's different is the ability to remove all the filters. So you're actually getting the hearts and minds at an organic level. And then from a bottom-up perspective, this is, aggregating. So I think that that's what's different. Has deception and psychological operations and psychological manipulation, is that new? I don't know. I don't think there's a history that goes back thousands of years, but I think it's been around for a while. I think the difference now, Angelo, is the depth and the ability to remove all the filters and go straight from, a foreign country into the hearts and minds of a teenager. I think that's what's different. And you don't have the internal cohesion, within the family unit or within a corporate unit. And again, it goes back to that notion of, people being on the same sheet of paper, at least a little, not a lot. And I think that's the difference. Is it a new tactic? No, not at all. But is it becoming more effective? I'd submit to you that there's a concomitant relationship on efficacy with the rise in information technology, especially if you take a look at what AI is going to do. A lot of these campaigns that may have required some degree of human management and human scalability, that's giving way to automation, whether it's hacking, deepfakes, or other things. And I think that is a problem that kind of raises the temperature on the severity of the threat and the risk. Has it been around for a long time as a tactic? For sure, or a strategy? Yeah.
Something going on, I guess we could say. We see it now: Russia, the Ukraine, the Middle East. What I'm going to say from a person who's traveled the world, who's been around families of significant influence, the vast majority of them that are billionaires, they don't know what they don't know. Could I make the argument that someone like Putin, to make the decisions that he's made, unless he's a madman, I suppose that's a possibility, but in reviewing his actions relative to what that would look like, the answer to that is probably no. And we hope not, because then that could be more of a greater risk of things going nuclear. What I am saying, and some of you could listen to my podcast with Adam Robinson, where we kind of discussed this issue as well. I'm going to make the assumption, given that he may control more resources than any person in the world, he's been around the block, he's been an intelligence officer, he probably knows things that we, even some people in government and even billionaires, don't. Does Putin know effectively, Michael, things that we simply do not?
I think the short answer is I think Vladimir Putin always knows things that we probably don't. It's a matter of degree. I think if you take a look at his actions, they may seem sadistic through the lens of an optimistic West or Western world, but his actions are entirely pragmatic and logical, especially when you look at them in retrospect. Does he have access to information and things? I mean, he's got access to an entire tailored nation state intelligence and defense and, apparatus, and he's got nuclear weapons to back up, his commentary. But he doesn't need nuclear weapons because a lot of stuff that he's doing to distract or misdirect, we're buying hook, line, and sinker. It's rumored that he indicated a week before October 7th that he said no one's going to care about Ukraine in a week. Now, I have no idea what was going on over here or elsewhere in the world. And again, it's a rumor. It's not substantiated. I didn't see him say this. I don't know anybody who did. But if it is in fact the case that Putin said a week before, the invasion of Israel, or whatever some of our viewers may want to call it, the point of fact is that there's no way that Hamas and Iran could have done what they did without informing their partners, either on the military front or on the economic front. And so I think that, did he know something before us? Probably. Did he indicate it? I think so. And I don't think he was wrong. I think if you look up, if you take a look at the lag now that we have in supporting Ukraine, obviously the events of the 7th and the events in the Middle East took everybody's eye off the prize and didn't keep the pressure up on, increasing or rather even sustaining economic aid to Ukraine and military aid as well. And so does he know things? I mean, he's got an entire intelligence service that serves his economic interests. And I think that if you look at the deck chairs that have moved around at the leadership, these are people that are actually being put in national security and military roles that really have better backgrounds in technology strategy and economics, and how to basically leverage that, as opposed to necessarily, defense production or headcount or manpower or things of that nature. So there's some really interesting things that are, and I'm not a Russian area expert, but there's some very, very interesting things that lend one to believe that Putin's focus is obviously continuing, his, I think, fifth term as president, which is impressive, but solidifying his economic grasp, not only over Russia, but satellite states in the world. And I think if you take a look at Ukraine and remove oneself from the philosophy that was about NATO containment, I do call it a philosophy. I also call it an assertion, and think about it more pragmatically as an economist, which I'm not either. But if you take a look at all the rare earth minerals, oil and gas,
I
other
was getting to
yeah,
that.
that are in Ukraine that we desperately think we need to empower all these high value added industries, whether it's batteries or satellites or other systems. Well, the low end estimates are in the low trillions insofar as rare earth minerals that are actually in Ukraine. I've seen estimates that are exponentially greater than that. I don't think Putin does things accidentally. I don't think he did anything accidental in Ukraine. I think it was, we started this a long time ago. We said there was a red line in the sand. They walked right across the red line and we didn't do anything. And then years later, they basically walked in and, the response was fleeting. So I think that if we look at this, there is a global competition right now to get as many rare earths, to get as much oil and gas, hydrocarbons and other materials locked down. And so do I think that Putin knows more than us, knows more than me? And he's got the intent and the ability, and doesn't seem to be radically challenged on too many fronts, in my view.
Indeed. And I think as we're looking back now after 15, 16 months, some realities are coming to the forefront. I agree with you. It's been said there's only a couple of trillion, which is still a lot in the Ukraine. But talking to people that you know and that I know, that number in terms of so-called what's in the ground is probably closer to 30 trillion. To think that resources, which equates effectively to monetary value and what they may deem to be a new quote unquote order in the world, to think that's not going to matter or not play into it, I think is kind of foolish. Michael, is true intelligence the ability to change, the ability, because we don't want to stay anchored. So how do we have habits that we fall victim to anchoring, to confirmation bias? And how do we learn if we become anti-fragile in verbiage that I'll use and that I teach through capacity and capability, especially of the rising generations? They do need to be stressed. I use that word uniquely. So, and I'm going to actually ask a question in about 20 minutes relative to IQ, but relative to the word intelligence in military and in government circles, what exactly does that mean?
I think for anybody that you talk to in the intelligence world, they may have a different take on it. But I think at the end of the day, intelligence is supposed to be a value-added product that's, the aggregation of structured, unstructured, formal, informal data of all types, whether it's geo or whether it's, metadata from phones or a million other things. It's really about trying to create a picture that's refined, that allows you to do some form of analysis that then hopefully empowers your decision making, both in real time as well as in the future. So intelligence is a refined product from multiple sources that come together to drive analysis that then goes to hopefully drive decision making. Do I think that there's a de-link between intelligence and analysis and decision making? Yeah. And is it structural? In some cases, yes. In some cases, the intelligence is delivered to policymakers and decision makers, but that doesn't fit the narrative that the policymaker and decision maker wants to create. So therefore, the intelligence is actually shelved. So in my opinion, if you're talking about the universe of, national security and that type of stuff, or even not, intelligence is refined, presumably refined multi-source information.
Excellent. And audience, this is going to be a long form interview. We have a lot of subjects to cover. Parts of it towards the end will be probably 10, 15 questions, very rapid fire. We hope to engage, but you have to ask the questions too. for those of you that are live, for that to happen. And that last 10 minutes, which may be, again, a pretty long way in, we're going to really start to get to what are some of the true solutions, even though we're kind of throwing them out there, how you could utilize information, how you could think differently, truly critical think, make your own decisions, and hedge against the risk, quote unquote, and as well as leverage up on opportunities. So it's being woven in there. You got to listen, but definitely more of it's upcoming. And in the last 10 minutes, we'll give ways that you could interact with that and utilize it more efficiently, for lack of a better word. Michael, in a fight to death, there are no rules and anything can happen. Is there a distinction between beliefs and values? Basically, are we taught that beliefs are facts?
I think it depends on how you're, not to be flip with the question. I think that you have to have some kind of a compass as a human. I think it's part of what makes us sentient. Whether that truism or that lodestone or your center of gravity is internal or externally driven, who knows? But I think knowing who you think you are helps one move forward. If you have no idea who or what you want to be or are, I think that makes things substantially more complicated. Do I think there are absolute truths? I mean, that's partially theocratic and philosophical, and I'm not equipped to necessarily answer that. But I think perhaps a different way of thinking about the impact of your question and the impact of being able to answer it is, does this country actually have a common identity? And that's perhaps my asymmetric way of answering your question. I'm not sure anymore. I don't know. I don't know that we actually know what we stand for. And I think that, there's an incredible confliction here. Without getting into depth or commentary on this, I think if you take a look at some of the protests that are on campus as it relates to a particular position, it starts to run into conflict with itself, because some of the things in some of the nation states or some of the non-state actors that are being advocated or whatever, their philosophies are not congruent in the Western sense. And that's a very vague and elliptical comment. Do I think that many countries have an identity? I think many countries have a better identity than where we're going. Do I think we have an identity today? I think we have multiple identities. And I think that you've got one political party thinking that they're one identity and another political party thinking they're another one, or kind of the aggregation of a number of ones. I think that if I go back to when I was a Boy Scout, and I know this is going to be pedantic, especially for the overseas viewers, at least we could start with the fundamental that we were in the U.S. and we took a Pledge of Allegiance and we believed in the Boy Scout credo, right? I'm not sure that that's really common now, and I don't think there's one singular doctrine. And I would simply observe that. And I hope that answered part of your question.
Yes. And as usual, brilliant answer. And you basically hinted at in your answer kind of two of the upcoming questions that I have. So we'll get to it. Kind of, is the American system coming apart? Let's just throw it out there. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and others, all powerful and with dangerous militaries. But maybe in this perspective, less so the military, but an antagonist to Western values, colluding and working together. Is this imaginary on my part? Are we letting it happen? And what can we do to offset it?
It's an intense question. I ultimately believe that the roots of our own success or failure are largely to be written by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
However, when we're being what could be interpreted as either confused, distracted, or self-destructive, or so narcissistic, or so isolationist that we cannot understand not only ourselves when we look in the mirror, but certainly cannot understand how a lot of the world right now is very confused with what we are, what we think we are. And, you and I both spend a lot of time, as do most of the people that I know that are on this, broadcast. We're international in our communication strategies and are on the phone with multiple countries every day. I find that an increasing percentage of my time is consumed in trying to answer questions from leaders in other countries about what is going on here in the US, because people can't figure it out. I'm not sure we can figure it out. And so I think that, do we need to worry so much about other countries? Yeah, for sure. And we should more actively, and we should be more aware of how there's external forces that are actually leveraging our lack of cohesion to their advantage. Do I think that should be the overarching rubric, is only look outside and only say that this is what external actors are doing? No, that's not enough. What has to happen is we all have to come together and ascertain if the American or whatever experiment, if it is still an American experiment, or if it's some hodgepodge transnational capitalist miasma. I'm not sure. But if we don't get our own program together, right, then external actors are going to continue to increase the size of the divide.
And you hinted at it a couple of minutes ago, but it's my follow-up question to that again, you did address some of the issues on. Related to that last question, what's occurring in the universities over the last 30 days? Now they're starting to have their graduations. We'll head into the summer and we'll see how things shape up again when it comes back in late August, early September. But the youth, the Generation Z, a large, quote unquote, audience, and young and impressionable, it seems like there's a coordination of efforts, going to my last question, among our adversaries to cause misinformation, to cause divide. Maybe I'm imagining this, I'm taking it too far. I'm not. And I guess I go back to, and I'm sure we're doing some variations to others too. I'm not saying it's only against us, but how do we better, if this is a reality, which it is, how do we better unite as a country?
Turn off the Wi-Fi and take their cell phones. I mean, I'm sorry for the flip answer, but I've heard all this, ridiculous synthetic anguishment in conventional media channels. I mean, if you look at the rates of dependence that people have on their smartphones and social networking, I'm pretty sure that you're going to have a problem if you take their phones away. I'm pretty sure you're going to have a problem if you turn off the Wi-Fi, right? Really, I mean, the amount of hardcore dedication and the ability to really, I'm sure I'm going to get millions of pieces of hate mail tomorrow, but really, I look at these things. These are not the protests on campus are not an existential threat. Are they managed? Probably. I mean, most people don't have all day to go and chill out in the university square. If they're, not students, what are they and why are they there? There's clearly money and organization that's going into putting some of these things together. I don't have the information or the insight to know who that is, but I've said quite simply, if you just turn off their phones and turn off social networking, it'd be interesting to see how long those quote protests actually continue on both ends.
And I mean, it appears like moving forward, we're not fighting a war of geographies per se, but kind of related to that question on the universities and the young ones, the Gen Z, really the hearts and minds, that really is the fight of our young people and effectively of the unrest and bifurcation heading into this election year in 2024 that we're seeing here in the US. I'm not saying that we haven't done this too, and now it's kind of coming back on us. And I guess I go back to, and maybe it's a little bit of a similar answer from your perspective, but we're not necessarily fighting a war of geography here in this country. It appears to be more for the hearts and minds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a thinking person's game. And I wrote a paper a really long time ago, which in retrospect was hardly original because it'd been written hundreds of times per se. But if you just take a look at the difference in board games, between chess, Go, and checkers, right? They're all technically games of strategy. But then you start looking at the orders of complexity, data, et cetera, that goes into playing these games. And they're all different. And I'm a fan of Go. I'm a fan of chess. I don't know why. I'm really quite terrible at checkers, and I'm not necessarily very good at chess. I really enjoy Go, but I'm not very good at it. I think that the game that we need to play is a slightly smarter one that's a slightly more patient game. And this may be a nice transition point to Black Swans before the break. I would observe that Black Swans are those events that you're not supposed to necessarily be able to anticipate. There comes a point in Go, right? And I won't get into any granularity here, where, the entire balance of the game can shift fairly quickly in a way that may not have been foreseeable. And I'm sure some of you are thinking about, well, AI, is being used to play Go and stuff like that. Well, that's nice. But, having had some, insights into modeling and simulation and predictive analytics for a while, the fact of the matter is that you have to run these simulations millions and millions and millions of times and then look for the anomalies. And it's only by focusing on the anomalies after millions of trials that you actually start to get some insight that you can actually use for future leaning decision-making. So Angela, to your question, I think one issue is that do we need to change the game from checkers to something perhaps a little bit more, complicated? Yeah. Do we need to do it soon? Probably. Because we have increases in ambiguity, increasing, volumes of information, automatic generation systems that are putting information out there that's clearly not in humanity's interest, or rather our national security interest. As these things accelerate and deepen, we need to have more consciousness about it. And if you look at the, above the fold in most newspapers these days, again, probably hate mail tomorrow on this one. Do we really need end-to-end, 24/7 coverage of one trial in New York? I don't know. What happened in the Middle East? I'd like to know. What happened in Ukraine? I'd kind of like to know. What's happening between the Philippines and China? I'd like to know.
We're getting to that one later.
It doesn't really seem to be the focus of anybody that's actually printing per se, but actually publishing these channels of information. And so those things that I referenced, you take a look at the foreign press, the Straits Times in Singapore, Deutsche Welle, the German, outlet, the BBC has become, again, probably hate mail tomorrow, seems, at least in the USA version, to be a parroting rather, of the US news that we want to hear. But there's a lot of things that are actually getting a tremendous amount of coverage that are really not relevant to anything as it relates to our country, our national security, or the global economic well-being, full stop.
And right before we have a chance to give Michael a 2-minute break, and I'll be with you, but to give you a little bit of insight, what's coming up in the coming after the 2-minute break, we're going to do a little deeper dive into the movie Leave the World Behind. We're going to talk more and get right into AI and get into cyber attacks and a lot of the things that we're seeing from deep fakes, which combine, of course, aspects of AI and cyber, and the impact that it's having on American and other companies that are truly significant. And then segue into a really cool round robin session, including that China and the Philippines. And probably most of you really, that's important relative to the subject? Oh, it absolutely is. And you're going to learn why, and hopefully all of you can interact. So Michael, I'm going to allow you that 2 or so minutes now. And while Michael is segueing a little bit and taking a bit of a stretching the legs break, I'll keep you all, I don't know if I'd use the word entertained, but we'll give it a shot. But Michael, go for it.
You're right back. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, I hope you're enjoying Michael Irish. I knew about Michael Irish for a number of years. I became first introduced by a mutual acquaintance about 2 months ago. And I believe he saw some of my interviews with Ian Burlingame, a former Green Beret and deep thinker and geopolitical guy, and a whole bunch of others. So it's great to get to know him and to collaborate with him on some clients and prospects that we're mutually doing some work for. And again, the subject, sovereign risk, disaster preparedness, this is like among at the heart and the most significant work that I've done with a continuous family of incredible wealth year after year, because it's not set it and forget it. It's complicated. So, and yes, one day I'll release a digital download of 5 or 7 hours on that subject. I'm going to have the time to really shoot that, maybe later this summer in August, and that'll be available to my members or paying relationships in my master classes. One or two questions. I see, Jack, I think you meant it as a quasi compliment, but maybe not. And it's okay. I've heard everything over the years. I don't mind it. I want to be an open book. Yes, my podcasts are probably different than some of the other family office podcasts that you've heard. And some of them are friends of mine, but maybe it's just me. So many of them are so boring, linear, and vanilla. I love to talk investments, and we definitely do a lot of that. Structuring in the family office. I don't do as much on family governance and dynamics. I could probably do a little more, but I do tackle subjects and then try to bring it back to the world of wealth and family offices and things you could do. I think probably the most, but I cover certain subjects that are sensitive and sometimes bring on a little bit of hate and shadow banning. But I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to do what I do and provide value to my audience. And hopefully it's something that either sparks a thought, interest, a like, a dislike. But I don't want to be just down the middle. You wouldn't believe among my peers who've been in the community for decades, Angelo, why do you go down these subjects? Keep it just plain down the middle. Oh, what right do you have to talk about geopolitics? Really? Like, that's the whole thinking about groupthink from someone inside a given industry that doesn't want outside perspectives. I could go on and on about that subject. Go to angelorobles.com and learn more, and even go to my Family Office TV tab there, where we'll put this interview with Michael probably by next week up on there, but some other related interviews already up on there in my YouTube platform. As we can see, Michael, that was a fast 2 minutes. It's great to see you back. And why don't we get right to it? So the movie that I did watch, I think about 6 months ago, Julia Roberts was in it, Leave the World Behind. And it spoke about three things. And I actually, earlier in our interview, I think I brought up two of the three, that our enemies would, step one, isolate us, step two, synchronize chaos, and step three, civil war. Now that sounds a little bit like the old school Green Beret handbook that I mentioned earlier, with maybe a little twist now in some of the things that you mentioned, from more of the reliance on electricity and technology. But could I make the argument, and I'm not saying that none of that is not true, and we should be aware of these things, but I also read General Flynn's book about 5G warfare. And when I mentioned that step one, step two, step three from the movie Leave the World Behind, it sounded a little dated to me. That's 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, and that now it's way more complex, from financial markets warfare to what we're seeing, and you might have indirectly hinted at TikTok and others. So why don't I zip up and get your feedback if you saw the movie and if you read General Flynn's book, and perhaps is the movie a little bit dated?
I really apologize to do this to you. I'm not familiar with either. I had the film on the background, and I have not read the general's book. So if you don't mind revectoring the question, Angelo, I'm sorry. Maybe I can perhaps better answer it.
Of course, of course. And the audience, I do recommend, like it or not, watch the movie. And those are things to be concerned about. But I also recommend, whether you like him or not, reading General Flynn's book that basically will talk that that's a little antiquated thinking. And that absolutely relates to how things are antiquated in many family offices with hedging risk and taking advantage of opportunities. And by reading that book and understanding the nuance of what I said, I think that will be of help to you. A little bit of one of my philosophical type questions, which I do like to dabble in. The great John Fowles explains in Eratos back in 1964 how a high IQ can subvert your will to act. High intelligence, he states, leads to multiple challenges of interest and sharpened capacity to foresee consequences of any action. In other words, it's in your head, you're overthinking. Will is lost due to labyrinth of hypotheses. So maybe rule number one, don't lose your will. Michael, how do we not lose our will and don't overthink things?
Wow. Let me go to something that I remember reading a long time ago. There's a bucket of intelligence, right, as a species that we have, and sentience and a number of different variables, but there's a lot of different forms of intelligence, right? I mean, we know this, right? So there's people who can have spatial relationships with their environment that other people cannot. There's an ability to do things mathematically that other people cannot. Same thing with language. I think that the key to kind of having breakthrough moments as a species or as an individual is that ability to sometimes go beyond what our predominancy is, or our predominant modality of intelligence. I know some intensely brilliant people. I also know that some of them are so smart and have so much information that seems to be constantly digested and analyzed and product generated, that the most simplistic of things like driving or flying a plane or whatever become complicated. I think that as we have more and more information, I don't think more information is the answer. I think it's constantly, I mean, this is not my thought, it's not my theory, it's not, it's something I do try to do, but to constantly challenge those different modalities of intelligence, to keep the brain kind of working. Some of the work that we've been doing the last several years has had to do with longevity. And if you take a look at aging and you take a look at neurology and neuroplasticity, the key, in addition to exercise and other things that are kind of common sense and diet and sleep, have to do with constantly looking and doing things, whether it's a hobby or not, that are different, that may not be necessarily in your box per se. So I think, and I, as a person who, used to do music or perform music, who's always dabbled in art or a million other things, it's that ability to try and give everything you have to try and learn something new. And you may not master it, but it can be fun. But I think that the way that you enhance intelligence across the board, is by going, well, did I expect to be speaking Portuguese this morning? No, I did not. Did I have the chance to do it? Yes, I did. Was that fun? Was it exciting? We tend to do things better that we actually enjoy. And I think that to keep your, one's intelligence, at a, level where we want it, and to continue growing because we can, is to constantly be going outside of that conventional narrative, that conventional modality, and other areas that are going to challenge us and provide, some degree of reward. I'm not sure if that's the question that you wanted answered, but that's the question that I have as I see it.
I like it. I think we're going to transition to a very important segment, and I am going to build it up a little bit by reading, and then I have 3 specific questions from it. The rapid anarchic escalation of AI and what its implications will be. So there's a fascinating read in Popular Mechanics, April of 2024, called A Stunning New AI Has Supposedly Achieved Sentience. It states, and I'm cutting it a little short, AI company Anthropic released Claude 3, an update to its powerful large language model AI, and it appears to have immense capabilities. There are some that are left wondering if Claude 3 has reached a certain level of self-awareness, well ahead of the curve that Ray Kurzweil and others point out. Although there are those that say within 2 years, AI will be 800x more powerful than it is today. So while Claude 3's abilities are impressive, there's still a reflection of AI's remarkable ability to identify patterns, but lack the important intelligence to match true human sentience so far. The questions in rapid fire: is this more hype?
Well, there's a lot of hype. Everybody's definition is different on, this area. It was about a year ago, I was in San Diego, and, the conference that I was attending, or thought I was attending, was on the convergence between healthcare and AI, or rather how AI was going to radically change healthcare. AI didn't change the fact that United Healthcare got mercilessly hacked and compromised at least a solid quarter to a third of the population's medical information. Maybe. I don't know. I really don't know. All I know is that whether any information went out or not, the fact that by the public, narrative, it's going to be about a 1 billion plus hit on the company. That's a material consequence. Was AI employed to defend against it or used to do the hack? Who knows? This is going to come together in one moment. AI is expected to have a combined aggregate growth rate of almost 40% until 2030. That is real. That's a real growth rate. But in talking to a lot of executives that, want to hear my points of view on this, here's what I would observe. I think it's not even a knee-jerk reaction. I mean, there's a lot of people. I'm in the Bay Area today. There's a lot of people who are being laid off in some really, really amazing segments of industries rather, where they're being laid off because it's the belief of their management that's looking at the bottom line and seemingly only the bottom line. The AI can do their job. In some cases, people are being told, you can train the AI system and then we're going to fire you. Okay, that's even worse than training your human replacement, right? Now you're going to train your machine replacement. And do I think that the hype is hype? Yeah. Do I think that the economic impact is real? I do, but I don't think it's only beneficial. I don't think it's necessarily a net positive. We have a robotic car company here that's operating with license in San Francisco, and I'm not going to name them, but I've had several incidents where they were speeding, they were tailgating, or they almost drove into me. There's an argument that some have made that, machines are going to be more reliable than humans in driving. I think if humans are actually staring at their phone, they're not really doing their job as a driver. But there's a lot of things about AI where we're not really thinking through what we're doing. I say this only slightly tongue in cheek. I was calling American Express the other day, and I think it was around minute 8 of losing my patience with the so-called intelligent voice response system, that I was like, wow, this really bodes well for AI. If you can't get voice response right using AI, I'm not really sure I would want to trust it with a car, a bus, a train, or a plane. Does it have impact? Can it collect a lot of data and go through it and make a sentence? Yeah, but I don't really think that that's what intelligence is either. So are we in a hype cycle? Sure. Gartner called hype on it. I think we're in a hype cycle for a while. I think anything that has a 30 to 40% combined aggregate growth rate for the foreseeable future, at least the next 4 to 5 years plus, yeah, that's something that we need to pay attention to. The broader problem, Angelo, is that things are being generated, by some very, very bright people and put on the street before they're tested. What if we actually, pull AI back for one moment? What if somebody invented a new pacemaker that hadn't been tested, hadn't been tried, and had no regulation, either from the FDA or other regulatory agencies? And we said, this is an incredible pacemaker. You should just go put it in tomorrow, or any other kind of medical device. We're talking about things that have not dissimilar impact on humanity, that we're just pushing out. And the notion of the private sector regulating itself, or having a conscience that's actually bigger than the bottom line, okay, I can accept that. But I'm a capitalist and I work with capitalists. I advise capitalists on how to make more money, and a lot of it. And there are some that basically have ethics, and a sense of doing better for others before oneself. But I wouldn't say that's an absolute, as with anything. So do we have the guardrails in place per se? I don't think so. I don't think we have, I know that we have a new diplomat from DC, from the State Department, that's going to be responsible for, things related to AI and cyber and things of that nature. That's lovely. But if we take a look at the overall global, economic output, and how much of that is now biased towards information systems and things of that nature, vis-a-vis, military conflict or other stuff, or, state to state relationships, I think we have a lot of catch up to do. I don't think AI has the policy framework that it needs, because, as I observed earlier, I'm not sure we have the legislative or the governance that we actually need as a country at all. That's just my own personal opinion, not necessarily that of my company.
Of course, then the challenge to that becomes relative to ethics, relative to governance and framework, all very important, but our arch rivals for the countries. And again, 10, 20 years, who knows? Friends are enemies, enemies are friends. So nothing lasts forever. What I am saying, though, is that some of them are rapidly advancing in what they're doing in AI and quantum. And just because we may end up having ethics and governance, I don't think they really give a shit. Therefore, there's lots of potential challenges, not just on deepfakes and costing companies money, but from weapons to biology weapons to lots of things. We are heading, it might have been Eisenhower, something to the effect of what will World War III look like? And he had like a brilliant answer, like, 70 or so years ago. I don't know, but I know that World War IV will be sticks and stones. In other words, we're at the stage now where if this truly gets global and it goes nuclear, and it goes nuclear around the world, civilization as we know it is kind of over. It's so fragile now than ever before. And how this relates back to AI and nation states, some of you are going to have to form your own conclusion. My follow-up questions, Michael, unless you had a comment on my comment, but you did kind of answer them. What does this mean? Meaning that Popular Mechanics article on Anthropic and their Claude 3, and why does it matter? But if you wanted to put a loop on it or a comment on my comment, I will give that floor to you.
I would just like to see, I suppose, if one had a magic wand, some modicum of interest in things that, really can have some impact on humanity, not only here, but globally. And, as with any technology, and AI is not in its infancy. Cyber is not in its infancy. Quantum computing is technically in its infancy, but it's been around for a while. And all of these things have been, contemplated. But all the recommendations, strike that term, many of the recommendations that were made as we were looking forward 10 and 20 years ago on these various subjects, there's really nothing that's actually taking place to either come to grips with it or accommodate it. And again, not necessarily a proponent of regulation, but even having a legislative and regulatory framework in where it could fit. And I don't think having a whole bunch of CEOs go to Capitol Hill and tell Capitol Hill that, yes, we take this desperately seriously. Yes, we need legislation, but our lobbyists are going to tell you something different. I think there has to be an awareness. There's a tremendous amount of money that can be made, but when you have very, very smart people who are inside of the AI universe, basically saying that, AI has the potential to do away with a tremendous percentage of jobs globally. I think, and there needs to be a mandatory living wage. This is not a new concept. And how many times have we heard in this country and others where, don't worry about this technology advance or this, trade agreement. And yes, it will decimate some sectors of the labor force, but that's okay. We're just going to retrain them. Okay, well, when that actually works, give me a call, because I've seen no example of nation state level retraining, at least in this country, that had any efficacy whatsoever. So I think what you have now, literally here in the Bay Area, you've got highly qualified people that are being pink slipped because of the promise of AI as opposed to the reality of AI. And if you look at the aggregate amount of time that humans are being asked to waste to train AI systems today, it adds up fairly quickly. This is right now, I don't see, I'm happy to listen, and I'm sure I'll get more hate mail on this tomorrow. I'm happy to listen to good economic arguments on the net present value or the contribution that AI has made to date. And if it's there, show it to me. Otherwise, I'm kind of in the, wait and see category.
I hear you, Michael. That's and again, it's good to have a back and forth dialogue. I hear you, but I know it's been around for a long, long time. But I look at it really in the last 15, 16 months. Is it hitting that hockey stick? Is what people are saying. The CEO of Google stated this will be more impactful, a unique word, impactful than fire and electricity. It might have been Elon who said that 800x in 2 years. If they're off by 50% in relatively a given timeline, that still is impactful and scary. But I'm concerned about some of the same things that you are. And the work that I do with families and family offices, could there be job displacement? Actually, first, outside of maybe some light manufacturing, among white collar positions. And like you said, are they really going to be retrained? Do they want to be retrained? Are we going to end up needing some form of universal base income, which is very scary to me, but maybe decades down the road, maybe sooner, somewhat inevitable? Or you have the continuing divide of the haves and have-nots. The have-nots have every bit the voting power, in theory, that those in power do, and there's more people that are have-nots. Therefore, you now start to get civil unrest and challenges, some aspects that we're seeing now. And then I work and you do with families, one, through their philanthropic efforts, could they be impactful? What could they do to give back to society, and how they have optionality, multiple passports, gold, art, Bitcoin, structuring an onshore and an offshore plan, an extraction plan. And again, we could go on and on and on. My final comment relative to AI and family offices, and maybe it does take 10 years, but it's not way out there. I think closer to 3 to 5. But let's see if we can go with a little longer. If you think that your family office could ignore AI, both potentially from an investing perspective, but look at the Magnificent Seven, like a lot of them already, from Microsoft to NVIDIA to Meta, all are heavily active in that. But you're going to have a viable family office by not integrating, let alone investing AI and all that AI could potentially not only do now, but imagine 6 months to a year from now. You won't have a family office as we know it within 10 years if you take that attitude. And those whether you like it or not, again, I get hate mail, you get hate mail. We want to say things as we see them. Are some of them opinions that could be wrong? Absolutely. But I want to throw them out there for you to, again, like I did state earlier, to think for yourself. Transitioning, Michael, to me, what is somewhat related, cyber warfare, quantum computing. And you did mention the cyber attack earlier in the year on United Healthcare Group, or at least a subsidiary, that was very, very costly to one of the nation's largest employers, and having a lot of discretion and information on important things like medical records for probably millions and millions of people. If you want to expound upon that and talk about the threat of deepfakes and broadly what is loosely defined as cyber warfare? And then why not weave in quantum computing on top of it?
Always a small question. So let me address AI just for one moment. I may mischaracterize the quote, but the notion is that AI, was it more or equal impact than fire, Angela? Just to be clear, was it AI will have more impact than fire, or will be?
It will be the word. I think it's Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, and look it up. It's Googleable. Pardon that pun. AI will be more impactful than fire and electricity.
Okay. Well, that's fascinating, because that would mean that we'd have to go back thousands of years and actually see the future. But and I'm not going to take that on symmetrically, so I'm going to bob and weave just a little bit. I think that from a policy standpoint, were it to be the case that we actually had policymakers back during the advent of fire, a policymaker might have a rational conversation that goes somewhere along these lines. Fire is really super cool for like making food, and I can warm my thatch hut with it. And I don't have to wear so many clothes at night. And again, I can have a hot dinner and then go to bed with my fire. Okay. Conversely, fire can burn my village down, or burn me. And that's where some kind of logic, and thinking kind of come in. I believe I'm not, I was accused of being a Luddite a number of years ago. I'm the co-inventor on a couple patents in predictive analytics and machine learning. So I'm not sure if I fit that category of being a Luddite. But what I would observe is that technology is cool. There's a lot of really cool things that are out there that we have that can be used for a number of different purposes. Technology doesn't have a moral compass. Technology doesn't have a net positive or negative to it. It's how the person who's technically using the technology as a tool, how they behave and how they act, which should be driving the consequences. There's obvious exceptions, with pandemics and things of that nature, getting out of control, where humans can't do anything and things inadvertently are in the ecosystem or on the planet. But if you take a look at the commonality between AI, quantum, and cyber, I think in and of themselves, they're all there's a degree that makes them not a black swan event. And that, the trajectory of, starting out, whether it was Moore's law or things of that nature, or, the radical increases in processing power matched by the incredible cheapness of data and data storage. These are not, aha moments. These are things that had a fairly clearly delineated trajectory. It was simply a matter of how much time they were going to take to unpack. As I said, in my library, I have a book, Stealing the Network and Stealing the Country. That book is probably 20 years plus, right? So the notion of where our national security would be at persistent risk, that was also fairly well foreseen. Quantum computing, my first exposure to that was over 20 years ago. And if you take a look at what IBM and others are doing, these are all really pretty radical things. But where I come down is that I'm not sure that we have the tools to deal with AI or quantum or cyber as they stand alone. I think to get to the whole construct of what was unforeseeable, as I see it, is all of them coming together all at the same time without a global consensus as to how these respective tools, which are global game changers, again, in and of themselves, how these tools should be used. And are we going to use these tools where there may not be any money or return on investment for years or decades? For example, the environment. Okay, I see companies investing money in things that are going to allow them to have a lower headcount and reduce, their burden on customer service or accounting or a number of different things. I don't see anybody talking about how we're going to finance, AI or quantum to think through, the global ecosystem, the global environment. Is AI and quantum going to have any impact on the rainforest, or the fact that we've got ocean currents that are desalinating or not moving? There's some grand challenges here that do become existential fairly quickly, like the governance of the planet and our coexistence as a species. And so I think the technology can do incredible things. I think people have to get behind a particular thing and make the capital investments and intellectual investments to make these things change. Quantum computing and esoteric AI systems, quantum in particular, is the domain of very well-financed companies and governments. I don't think Greenpeace is going to be, using quantum computing anytime soon. And I just use that as a rough example. Furthermore, I see AIs being employed for, non-human warfare, whether it's drones or other things. But I don't know, Angela, necessarily that, any one of these areas is something that's a grand challenge in themselves. But getting to, do we have too much information? I would ask a different question. Do we have enough time in the day to contemplate all these things? And I submit to you and to the audience, obviously, that these are really big issues, and we're not spending the necessary time or energy to think through them and how to make ourselves better with them.
Can hacking information systems cause physical damage? Power grid, refineries, EV charging stations, ships?
Well, if those physical systems are dependent on connectivity or run on information, then I think the answer is obvious. There's been public discussions for decades now on, the systems that are used in refineries and the power grid and other things and their sustainability. I think that, I would go back to, I think it was the example in Florida where a lot of the EVs that were on the road lost battery power. And then a very benevolent CEO decided that, well, maybe with a little bit of a different input, that battery could actually drive the car farther. I think that at this point in time, physical systems are largely subordinated to information systems. And, I remember back before COVID, in 2019, I was giving a speech on blockchain. And, if you look at the energy and the hype around blockchain back then, compared to what necessarily isn't concomitant hype, but certainly hype as it relates to AI, everybody was gaga about crypto and blockchain, and it was going to revolutionize everything. And, people were, thinking through how to restructure their businesses to accommodate or to maximize or increase ROI on that. What I would say is that I don't know where blockchain is. I'm not a blockchain expert. I probably shouldn't have been giving a speech on it for sure to a whole bunch of CEOs. But I guess what I would observe is that, and thank goodness for Gartner, but, hype cycles are hype cycles, right? And it's kind of like when you're in them, you're not necessarily sure that you're necessarily in them until you're looking backwards. And I don't think AI is going to be a hype cycle. I don't think quantum mechanics and quantum computing are a hype cycle. I don't think cyber is a hype cycle. I think that, it's ironic because at a time where we had radically increasing cyber attacks, we also saw a concomitant decrease in staffing inside of U.S. corporations for people who could actually build defensive systems. And if you look at where a lot of the energy is going to go, right, if M&A and other things are an indicator, a lot of energy has to be given to automating cyber defenses. And this is not just, antiviral software and things like that. This is taking automated systems to not only detect, but hopefully learn and then preempt those attacks in the future. I think the other component, which gets back to my construct of trying to have some degree of human in the loop, there's a lot of things that obviously can be automated, no doubt. But I think if we're taking, whether it's, political, military, economic, whether it's a corporate decision or whether it's something to do with cyber, whether it's threat vectoring or trying to figure out how do we as a company actually navigate through this. I don't think there's any substitute for using humans or boards of directors to actually think through some of the grand challenges. And that's, one of the things that I began with was talking about how wargaming was used in the Second World War to anticipate and prepare for the eventual battle in the Pacific in World War II. A lot of things that we talk about, if you actually get people around the table and they actually think the event is realistic enough, you can actually, present them with situations and scenarios from information that you've collected and thought through. And then by testing those assumptions and decisions, you can gain insights that you may not have otherwise had. And I hearken back to the notion of science fiction for one moment. Science fiction provides a path for people to see the possible that they may not have automatically on their own seen. And I think that you have to believe something is possible in order to pursue its evolution or realization. Why did we have flight when we did? Why did we have all these other, human inventions? If you don't believe something's possible, it may come to be in one way or another, but it sure helps to create something if you actually believe that the possibility exists in and of itself. I think that when it comes to AI, we're talking a lot, and this is where hype is convergent. We're talking a lot about the possibilities. We're not talking about the realistic application. We're not talking about the incredible implications to the middle class in this country of what AI probably will do. And we're certainly not taking cyber seriously. There are some new developments on the regulatory side with the SEC. I'm probably going to get this a little bit off, but at least publicly held corporations now have some mandate to report if they've been attacked and it had some degree of consequences on their ecosystem. I think that'll help to lift the lid on transparency. But there's all these things where a lot of corporations think that the government's going to be there to help, whether it's in geopolitical affairs, the economy, or cyber, or other areas, right? Where why isn't the government doing this? The government is only so big, and it can only do so many things. And whether it's, in counter-espionage for economic, and intellectual property theft, there's just not enough people to go around compared to the symmetrical risks that we actually face from China, Russia, and others. Right now, we're overwhelmed, period. And so the private sector has got to rethink the way they approach their risk profiles, number one. But then two, for a lot of folks on this call who are investors, every time there's something that the sky is falling, there's an opportunity to make a lot more return on investment. I think that some of the people that are actually driving global affairs and acts that are either acts of war or acts of terrorism, they knew what they were going to do. People that they were affiliated with know what they were going to do. And if you take a look at the behavior of the stock markets and short and long positions before the attack on Israel, somebody knew what was going on enough to make some really substantial positions. And we've seen that in other situations around the world. So my observation here to the folks on this broadcast is that, yeah, there's a lot of things that we need to think better about and more deeply, but there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I would pause there, Angela.
No, that's fantastic, Michael. And I'm beating to the punch. We still have a way to go. But when we get to kind of the conclusion part, which will be actionable steps you could take, one of them, and I've done this before for years with single family offices in the consultants world, it's called a tabletop exercise. You may call it a red cell, wargaming, it may go by different names, but you working with either a principal or the head of the family office, you bring up one or two or three scenarios that could go wrong. A principal going down, a CEO level person who was, I don't know, an insider and a spy, and what could go wrong, or simply dies. Now, I do this individually. Michael does it from his perspective and experiences individually, but it's better together. combining both of our resources to be able for significant families, their enterprises, their family offices, which would be my scope specifically, to do something like that that truly will help make the family more anti-fragile moving forward and the executives more nimble and adaptable. Forget about ego and blind spots. We all have blind spots. We need to identify the ego, don't get caught up in that, and work with others to make the family truly and the family office continuity, which is why I like that word so much and why my private membership club is called SFO continuity. Related to the subject that you just said, Michael, kind of two follow-up questions on it. China's deepfakes are so good, they often fool our Fortune 500 company executives, causing them a lot of misinformation, a lot of money. And they use, from what I've heard, although it doesn't seem to make the news too much, I wonder why, great avatars. So it's hard. It's getting harder and harder. Is anti-deepfake technology and AI keeping pace to detect? And how much of a problem is this causing? And now I'm going to bring it to my world. Could this be impactful to the super rich who are a target and their family offices? Deep fakes.
Really incredible question. I know of anecdotal examples that are not public with people who could have been a client but are not. By and where they thought they were having legitimate negotiations, financial, licensing, and investment, where deepfakes were used to gain the belief and the mind share of the executive team to such a degree that they relinquish the crown jewels of their intellectual property. Mm-hmm. That's a real issue. I don't, because of the fact that obviously the two of us are kind of familiar with what deepfakes can do, we have a better understanding of it. And the first question is, am I really actually talking to this person? And if I can't meet the person physically, in some city at some point in time, or, do something that wasn't scripted or, pre-organized to challenge the system, then is it real? These are things that are both happening with non-state actors and state actors. It's really important for everybody on this call to remember and be present in the notion that a majority of our national security is economic security. And if you decimate the economic base and the system that is dollar driven, there is nothing to defend. We are the economy is us, and our national security are inextricably linked with all of those. So if I can basically direct, a majority of my national technical assets to stealing other people's secrets, the benefits are huge. And are we aware of that? No. Is the government able to be everywhere simultaneously? No. Do a lot of private sector corporations that have been told that they are either at risk or will be at risk, or that they were at risk and something's been compromised, want to hear that? I think many corporations still are not very keen on the notion construct, whether it's in their, interest or not, of, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. I'm not sure that's a chasm that we're ever going to cross. But, there was something that I wrote 25 plus years ago, and that had to do with, this is going to get to your question, getting to the public sector working with the private sector more collaboratively to not only have a common picture insofar as, strengths, this is pedantic, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and how do we actually work more closely together. On the fundamental side, technology and technologies that can increase the industrial base and the technology base of the country and make us more competitive, those are good areas for collaboration. For a long time, a lot of collaboration and licensing between the US government, our national labs that are taxpayer funded, and then licensing those technologies to the private sector were deeply compromised and flawed. because there was such a philosophical divide between the public sector and who should own the IP and the private sector and what's necessary to actually take the technology, commercialize it, and make a market at the end, increasing top line revenue and a market. So there's a lot of areas where we, again, getting back to the earlier issues of hearts and minds and philosophy and information, we all have to recognize that working together, we're stronger. If we swim alone, we sink. I'm mixing my examples here, but the net is that there's incredible opportunities if we can come together at all and agree on something that we all need food to survive in some form or another, or maybe we don't. But it'd be nice if we had a common sense of framework so that we can deal with these more complicated, situations that require some deal of deep thinking and attention, such as what your broadcast is actually seeking to do today.
Well, thank you, Michael. And I have a very important question upcoming to leave it hanging just a little bit. It's coming up in about 20 seconds, so relax. We're going to go longer than expected. I thought 2 hours will probably be closer to 2.5 hours. We have a very important ending last 10 minutes, but I have a segment that's going to be a little different, and I've never quite done it in this format before, where I'm looking at about 50 other questions that are more shorter that I have for Michael, that we're going to go into a round robin session like that. I'll give a little more context to that in a second. There's some incredible questions, so you're going to enjoy it. But kind of putting a little bit of a bow on kind of this core topic that we're talking about, Michael, how the conclusion to everything that we've discussed so far, how they may all converge into what history may see as the ultimate black swan. What could we do about it? How could we hedge or get opportunity from it? You've hinted at some things along the way, but if you had to succinctly, in whatever 2 or 3 minutes, give an answer to that, what would you say?
I won't give 2 or 3 minutes to it. I think a lot more, asking of what if or what is possible, and grounding the question and the information which informs the question in what is thought to be better quality information is one way to start. For my friends in the healthcare sector that are on this call, the worst thing you can do to a doctor, if you really want to compromise the quality of your treatment, is to tell them that you saw an ad on TV for X, for some particular pharmaceutical, or you were online and you found this, and then you go to symmetrically juxtapose yourself with the doctor who's trying to diagnose your problem in the first place. I think that there has to be, some confluence of quality information and quality decision making. And there was a book a few years ago that was on the death of expertise. In a society, in a global ecosystem where everybody believes that they're an expert and everybody gets an accolade for maybe not even knowing anything, there has to be a recognition of who's an expert, who's not an expert. It doesn't mean that people aren't well-intentioned and can do 50 to 75% of what an expert can do, but there has to be a redelineation of what expertise actually is, and recognize that some people have more of it than others. And I think a lot of these problems are intractable if everybody's equal and has an equal opinion on things, where they may not know anything about what they're talking about. That's my first answer.
Excellent, Michael. And something you said earlier just stuck in my craw a little bit about if we're meeting people on digital platforms versus in person. Like, do we really know with how good the technology has gotten and some of the secrets that companies, families, and family offices have? Do we really know? And I started to think about that a couple of months ago. I looked into some deepfake technologies, and I'm a pretty active allocator, meaning as an investor in public and private markets in AI and broadly that community. It's one of the areas that interests me, where I see significant opportunity in. But yeah, there's so much. I don't want to scare the audience too much. Like, just think about it from the enterprise and family office perspective. What you don't know is damn scary, but putting your head in the sand is not going to be a proper solution. It's not going to be an opportunity for you to make money, and it's not going to be an opportunity for you to hedge the risk. You have to be familiar with these. And this does make now Deepfake is a grave challenge, including the families and family offices. You've got to stay ahead of this curve. And these are things where the right consultancy and work with you could help you to mitigate those risks and take advantage of opportunities. I'm going to do something a little different, partially due to the bequest of my tech and social media people. And Angelo, your interviews are ultra long form. And I'm so glad that Michael kind of chose me to be one of the people that he does a very long form interview with. So thank you. What we're going to do now is I got about 40 questions. We're not going to do 40. I'm going to randomly pick probably 10, 12, give or take a little bit. And Michael, what I'm going to do is we really are going to kind of keep this fast, frozen snowballs. I'm going to ask a short question. I promise they'll be short. And you're going to give a concise answer. That may mean a sentence. It may mean a minute. But I would like to buzz through a fair number of them. And to make my social people happy so we could do clips of it, after you answer, it may take me 2 seconds, a little hesitation, to bounce into the next question. It's easier for them to do their slicing and dicing. Here we go. Neuralink, half man, half machine. Reality or science fiction? Appears to be more reality from what I'm hearing lately. Do you see a near future where we are going to be a hybrid of man and machine?
I think you've answered the question. I think there already is a hybrid of man and machine to some degree or another. Bionics. I still remember the $6 million man, right? I mean, bionics have been around for a long time.
U.S. naval power. So historically, the world's strongest navies kind of have controlled who is the world reserve currency. Is U.S. naval power in decline, or very simply China's just catching up?
Depends on what kind of war you want to fight. But I mean, if you believe the notion that the warfare now is multifaceted, including, the information battle space and everything else, whether it's in space, on air, land, or sea, above sea and below sea, right? I'm not sure I can answer that question without actually having a juxtaposition with the other components of force structure.
Hypersonic missiles. It's believed that Russia has the most, then China, we're third. We might be playing some catch up, but does it really matter? What kind of defense system do we have? Because now we're talking with nuclear hypersonic, the world could be, quote unquote, a button away from, quote unquote, again, coming to an end. How do we stand on hypersonic missiles compared to our competitors?
I have no idea, but what I would observe, so no one's giving me classified briefings from any of the countries that you listed, but here's what I would say intuitively. I believe in this country. I believe in the US. I think we have a very, very good eye for military technology and other systems. Whether we're at parity, with a peer competitor or an emergent peer competitor, I don't know. I also think it's a really good idea not to inform your enemy insofar as your force posture and your technological capabilities. I think demonstrating continuous intention to use the entire range of your toolkit is a good idea. But I think at the same time, telling exactly what your capabilities and capacity are to inflict influence on another nation state or non-nation state actor probably isn't something that should be advertised. Do I have belief in our technology base? You bet.
Is the U.S. military too woke?
Not the people I talk to in the military. I'm not even sure. I don't have the answer to that. Do I think that there's things that appear a little esoteric for a military service? Maybe. I don't know, but I'm not in the military right now. I just talk to people in the senior leadership.
And Michael, how do we learn to get better at seeing around corners?
Completely self-serving answer. I mean, for 25 years, the best way to see around corners, in something other than measured in seconds or minutes, is to first of all recognize that there is a corner. Two is to recognize that at some point, I mean this quite literally, at some point you're going to be at the place where you're going to go around the corner or not, right? So the first thing you got to ask is what could be around that corner? Is it a panda bear, right? Is it a black bear, right? And I'm using these obviously as similes for nation states, but who knows? I mean, you've got to acknowledge that there is a corner. You've got to recognize that at some point, if you intend to turn the corner, this gets to intention. And then do you have the capability to turn the corner? They're both mental and physical and ideation challenges, right? But I think the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to have the right information, the most probable information on what could be around the corner. Recognize that you want to go around the corner, you want to see around the corner, and then game out what could be around the corner. And whether you're right or wrong, by going through that exercise, you're going to have a higher likelihood of guessing what is around the corner than not doing the exercise at all. And that's where wargaming and simulation, in particular, those things that are immersive, come in, and that's what we do.
Should we be doing much more in the US and Western countries on nuclear energy?
I think having a diversified energy portfolio is absolutely crucial, and I don't think we should be dependent on any particular type of energy generation. I think a broader question needs to be, how does the whole mosaic fit together? I mean, it was Exxon actually back during the oil embargo in the 70s that basically got knee deep into looking at solar, looked into lithium ion batteries and other areas. So, should we be revisiting nuclear? I'm sure that that's a question that Germany is asking vis-a-vis the invasion of Ukraine and their supply of oil coming out of Russia.
Does religion and governments, kind of meaning marriage and taxes with the government, kind of keep people in check? And most people are better being part of a community, being part of a belief in a system and following.
Wow. My degree's in international relations, but I don't know, Angelo. I mean, I think that's such a personal question for anybody and everybody on this call. I think that it comes down to the individual. Do I think that structurally having a common reference and common belief system makes the group more effective against people that don't have that connective tissue?
Yes.
Perhaps, yeah.
Maybe a little bit of your military background, but your call. How can you overcome not having an edge? The weaker one, the underdog, or are the winners going to be always the people with more manpower, better technology, or superior information?
Wasn't there a book called The Mouse That Roars? I think that being obsequious and sitting back and letting your opponent use their own energy and momentum, and then gently steering it is really the way to go. I think that putting yourself out there and making yourself a silhouette, at least my recollection as being a Marine rifleman, is not really where you want to be. So keeping a low profile, not letting your enemy get a beat on you, I think is generally a pretty good idea. Does that mean that you don't need to be brass tacks and sharp edged and sharp elbows at the right time? I think when you lay down a gauntlet, when you lay down a red line and you say, if you cross this and you don't do anything, you've set a truly horrific precedent for those leaders that come after you.
What should family offices be more concerned about counterparty risk?
Angelo, do I get one, lifeline here? I don't have an answer for that right now, given the time constraints. That's a very incredible question.
Specific feedback on the issue with the U.S. borders, Latin America into the U.S., quote unquote. I was reading, Chinese coming through to these encampments. Is this something where this is what makes America great? That we bring in people that are young, that are hungry, that are willing to grind, to put into work? We have enough issues potentially in Western countries with population to begin with, or is it way too open and a major risk?
I think not having control of anybody's borders is an issue. I think you should also have awareness of who's actually probably coming in and what they're doing. You know, and I guess the other issue that I would observe is I do believe in immigration. I believe that immigration has to be something which is consciously, dealt with. I have a lot of friends in other countries who would like to be working here that in many cases were actually educated here in the US up through the master's and PhD level in areas that we desperately have a gap in. And then they had to go home. They finished their degree. They didn't get the work visa that they actually needed and could not get on a path to citizenship here. Do I think that's a problem? Yeah, I think that's a problem. There's the question is do we have an immigration strategy that goes beyond, people repatriating with their family? I don't know. I don't see evidence of that. I certainly don't think it's sustainable to have out of control borders, whether on the Canadian border or the Mexican border or anywhere else. I would also mention just a little factoid here. A lot of people who overstay their visa came here legitimately as a tourist, and then they overstayed their tourist visa or their temporary work visa. And they came in through airports. But then once they got here, we didn't really have the ability to track them down. Employers have a dichotomy. I remember talking to the owner of a franchise, it's a franchise, okay? And they informed me that it was better to hire non-US citizens because they could kind of be a little more whatever with their so-called employee. I think we need to think about what are the strategies that work for this country insofar as our immigration policy. But any country that doesn't have some presence or understanding of who's actually going in and out of their borders, I don't think that's good. I mean, I think if you take a look at fentanyl, I think if you take a look at, the fact that we've got 70 different nationalities coming across the southern border, as I understand it, that's not acceptable. And, the same people who are bringing, narcotics that are killing our children are also doing human trafficking. I don't find any of that acceptable. And do I think it needs to stop? I do. More hate mail, I'm sure.
Cities are, I could argue, most vulnerable. They don't produce really anything from a survival perspective internally. Should wealthy, very wealthy families understand a certain inherent risk and, I could argue, have a rural compound?
Angela, you broke up for 1 second. I know it's not you. What was the end point of your
Sure.
question?
Cities are vulnerable. They don't produce anything internally. Should wealthy families have accessibility and actually have a rural compound?
I think that would depend on the advice of their security consultants, which if anybody doesn't have one, I can certainly make the introductions. I think that's a case-by-case basis. I don't think there's a blanket answer to that. I think it depends on their profile. I think it depends on their travel patterns, their behavioral patterns, whether they have kids in school or not, a million other variables.
Not to get too nefarious on that, but if there is a detail that is non-family, and we mentioned earlier about tribal from religion and government, where it simply is quasi-mercenary, what does happen if the shit hits the fan and there's not, a protection for the wealthy family? The strongest or the most violent will actually survive. I don't know if this is more of specifically a question or a comment. And I think what I may be hinting to is most security detail for even multi-billionaires is embarrassingly bad when it comes to the highest level of an enemy or opponent and an attack.
So the question is does the family actually try to outmatch a particular opponent or a portfolio of threat? I mean, that's something that really ideally a war game is something that could, answer that. I think until you actually think through, what the threat vectors are against a million other variables, which again, it takes a few days and a little bit of money and a little bit of attention. I think it's hard to game out all the risk. After 9/11, someone who was, I believe, perhaps the former national security advisor said, who could have ever imagined that, the towers could be attacked the way that they were, or that a plane would crash into the Pentagon? Well, I was living in Washington, D.C. in the 90s when a plane flew down over downtown D.C., flipped a U-turn, and ended up on the south lawn of the White House. Given that this individual actually worked in the White House, the fact that they couldn't imagine that seemed to be really interesting. This all comes down to, what is the least comfortable possibility that I can get my head around, and then how do I actually potentially explore it more deeply, and then plan for it. And a lot of people don't want to go through that.
Michael, I'm going to do 3 final, kind of in this round robin format, questions, and then we'll get to what I think is going to be a very important conclusion for many of you. Do you have a specific opinion on the TikTok upcoming ban here in the US?
Let's see if it happens.
That's a good one. Yes, let's do see if it happens. This may be one you just don't simply have an answer for. Probably not many people do, but that won't stop me from potentially or still asking it anyway. Future warfare will likely in time, I could argue, be controlled from space. The US probably, from what I gather, has a moderate edge right now, but nothing lasts forever. Should we be advancing our satellite and our space defense and warfare systems?
Unlike some people I know, I've never had the privilege of being in space and actually knowing what's up there. And I know the telescope, which is in the background here, doesn't have the ability to go through the atmosphere. I don't know what's in space. I don't think any of us do. That would be point number 1. But 2 is that I would argue even 20 years ago, the battlefield already was in space, because if you rip away our ability to do remote sensing, signals intercept, GPS, MILSTARS, which is detection of rockets that are launching that may be delivering a nuclear payload, all these things are space-based. So you start de-threading those assets and pulling them out of your overall capability, it becomes severe fast. So while I don't have any information on what's up there and what isn't up there, what's hype, what isn't hype, whatever you want to call it, it's almost impossible for me to believe a narrative by and where we would have trillions of dollars of direct investment at low Earth orbit, middle Earth orbit, and high Earth orbit without some form of defensive capability. Again, I don't know what's up there. All I know is that it seems completely illogical to me that you would put all those things up there and not have an ability to defend any of it.
And we briefly brought it up earlier, and some people are not going to know it and say, why the hell is this relevant? In short order, you're going to explain that. China going into the Philippines, is this an area of concern?
The Philippines think so. I think that those who are watching China that I know, I don't consider myself a China watcher. It's my understanding from talking to somebody who's over there right now, is that China made an argument that is, they're simply, they have a right to be there and to perhaps repatriate part of the archipelago, which I think is comprised of some 7,000 islands in the Philippines, because 3,000 years ago, it was under Chinese control. I don't think that would be the point of view of the Filipino people. I think it's also worth noting that a lot of investment that we made on shipping ports, et cetera, and infrastructure in the Philippines was not being recognized, perhaps. And there was a strong affinity with the last administration in the Philippines to become much, much, much closer to China. And that's why we had some fairly, when I say we, it's a royal we, there were some pretty big military exercises recently with the Philippines that, as I understand it rather, were designed to show that we haven't forgotten the Philippines. I also think that it's not completely unimportant to look at the stagecraft of having the Japanese prime minister and also the head of state for the Philippine government with President Biden several weeks ago. I don't think these things are lost on anybody. I think that a lot of these things are actually taking place not because there's an end goal necessarily specific to the theater or the country. I think that these are all tests to see how the rest of the world and to see how the US reacts, perhaps with other countries and other situations.
I actually do have the final question before we get to a very important, what I would define as close. And it relates a little bit potentially to that. Could I make the argument, you can make me be the bad guy, Michael, it's okay. Are too many family offices, they don't really look for and find, they don't put in the grind for exponential investment opportunities where they're doing their own sourcing, where they're doing their own diligence, and they're taking action. In other words, could I use the controversial word, and now you want to know why I get the hate mail, are they, and I mean this with all due love, family offices, and I could help, are you kind of sometimes too lazy?
Am I speaking on behalf of the family office, or am I projecting onto the family office?
Your experiences, are you seeing family offices really gung-ho and going after it and getting in there earlier stage for exponential opportunities that could have a significant upside for the family? Or are they being reactive, waiting for consultants and others to bring them boring, vanilla, check the box, I purchased IBM, and they're not taking enough risk?
Yeah. Well, I think I've founded 4 companies now. And so I seem to be a little bit on the edge of the risk tolerance curve. So I also have had a number of family offices very comfortably tell me that their rates of return are comfortable, and they've done a great job not only at defending their principle, but building upon it. So for me, I think there's, if you take a look just at AI, how is that 40% combined aggregate growth rate going to actually manifest? What is the range of investments that family offices are making in rare earths, and have they considered the fact that this incredible variable in the supply chain, which is Ukraine, right, is for all intents and purposes in play, and real people and real money and real expenditures are being made. It's impossible to believe that any of this or much of it has to do with NATO. I don't think so. I think that if you take a look at, the treaties that China is signing with other countries, whether it's Iran or Russia or others, these are treaties that ultimately, they talk about military cross-pollination and support, but at the end of the day, these are economic treaties that are resource-centric. Take a look at Africa, take a look at, Ukraine, take a look at, drilling in the open oceans. These are all things that are econometrically denominated. They're not military variables. So do I think that family offices, as with any investment umbrella, can they be more aggressive? I think as well, as long as it's blended into a portfolio that mitigates and levels out risk, I think that's a good idea. I think, are there opportunities that are exponential? I would observe to you that a lot of things that family offices did not know about rare earths and we brought to their attention, I think that may have had some impact, but who's to say?
Excellent. And perhaps in our final 10 or so minutes, and I'll give a little context to it. One, it's been great to have Michael on. He truly is incredible. I'm naturally very curious. I learned so much and I enjoy the conversation, but we're not done yet. So I stop and summarize a little bit, kind of almost a trifecta of rarity, extreme impact, and retrospective, but not prospective predictability. A small number of black swans explain almost everything in the world, from the success of ideas, from religion to dynamics to historical events to elements of our own personal lives. the opportunity that I say, working with family offices for a number of years, including with the rising generation, on what I define as capacity and capability, and that allows them the ability to be adaptable and have true family continuity. Wrapping up a mission statement that is generic as hell and kumbaya around the campfire is not going to get it done. And if you also, on the investing side, to maybe, I wouldn't say challenge Michael, but to add a little bit to what he said, was playing it overly safe when you as a wealthy family are buying things that are increasing way more rapidly in inflation, or what the government defines as inflation, coupled with expenditures, distributions from trust, taxes, a variety of government confiscation, which I guess is an uglier word than taxes, but it could get a little deeper. Like your 5 or 6% may not be getting it done. So that opportunity in the portfolio is also going to be integral. And I don't think it's spoken enough about when it comes to the, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. There's a variety of aspects to it that are all kind of intertwined. And one black swan event and not being prepared could be devastating. And we've had multiple, I could argue, over the last couple of decades. So the opportunity of working with you as entrepreneurs, investors, and family offices, most people know me as being the founder and longtime CEO at Family Office Association, had a successful exit, wish them nothing but the best in creating my holding company and private trust company that I'm working on in my beloved Wyoming, and becoming more of an active investor and kind of eating a little bit of my cooking. And the work that I've done on these subjects and the work that I continue to do around the world and have done for a couple of years, but really picked up in the last 2, relative to consulting, not just on creating, but revamping and working to make the family true family continuity. And coming across someone like Michael that I want to share with you, that brings a tremendous skill set to the table and works from a different perspective than mine. And then us collaborating and working together, whether you want to call it a tabletop exercise, a red cell, a wargaming, these are real scenarios that we could bring up and expose certain hazards and risk in an enterprise, a family, or a family office, and also the positive. Well, not just hedging risk, that is positive too, but the opportunities that are absolutely out there in today's world. So you all could reach me at angelorobles.com, follow me on my social medias and my YouTube, it's all good. But before I go to that final close, I want to kick it off to Michael and would like for him to describe what actions that you could just walk away with this independently as kind of valuable, sure. But for those of you that are more action oriented, Michael, what is something that they could do and interact with you, and potentially how could we do things together to, I hope, be of value to the community?
Angelo, first of all, let me reciprocate just a little bit. I want to thank you for providing myself and SedoGravitas with the opportunity in a forum which isn't, based on 8-second or 7-second sound bites to talk. So thank you for that. Thank you for the vision and taking a risk in what is a very long format. Second, yeah, that was great English, but hey, we've been on for 2 hours and 18 minutes. So I guess what I would observe is to those organizations that are actually out there today, some of whom I know, some of you I don't. What SedoGravitas is more than willing to do through the channel that Angelo's already set up is to provide you with access to a document that was actually published last year that would have normally cost several $1,000s. For the people who actually attended this broadcast now, live, or downstream, if you're willing to provide the basics like your email, prove to Angelo and me that you're not a robot, then we'll relinquish a 48-page document that's received a fairly interesting amount of feedback and response, both by corporations, family offices, hedge funds, and others, including governments, that will probably, at least if nothing else, provide a good thud factor for the coffee table. So that's kind of a gift, as well as a little bit of reciprocity for your time. And if that's of interest, then certainly one of my team or one of my affiliates in some of the more esoteric areas, say, for example, physical security, anti-terrorism, principal, systems, we can help out on that as well. But the channel of contact is through Angelo to keep it simple. And then we would endeavor to have something back to you in the near term. And obviously we're open up to Q&A. I know a number of you have been hitting me up on LinkedIn during this video, podcast, whatever. I'll reply to that accordingly.
Well, thank you, Michael. One, thank you for your kind words. Thank you for your friendship. And thank you for doing what many people don't like to do, especially on some sensitive topics. And that is a open, long form interview where you may get some of what some people define as the Angelo crazy questions. So one, I greatly appreciate you. And building a little bit upon that. So yes, you could reach out to me. You could go to my website and simply find my contact information and socials there. Again, that's angelorobles.com. My direct email, very simply, is angelo@angelorobles.com. I am especially active on LinkedIn with DMs. I recommend subscribing to my YouTube platforms. I technically have two, Family Office TV and @Family Office on YouTube. And again, a little bit of a central hub to a degree, not as perfect as I would like, is angelorobles.com. A couple of final comments I want to make. This was tremendous to have Michael on. Again, I'm curious and I learned so much. And I tell people, and I've had some people that pay tens of thousands of dollars a year to be a part of our private group, kind of our mastermind. You may, I'll be a little disappointed, but you may walk away with only one incredible idea from some of the private exclusive things that we do. But your ability to make the connection and to take action should, in theory, be worth such a multiple of that in a variety of ways, if not short term, from a legacy perspective. So for me, I love to teach. I love what I do at one of my other companies, Family Office Masterclass. I love what I do on Family Office TV in terms of sharing information on LinkedIn, YouTube, and other etc., other platforms. I do have a private club called SFO Continuity. I'm looking for 30 founding members, and I'm getting closer. This past week, two amazing families came on board, and I was very honored. And I've been going a lot to Palm Beach and Miami, where I'm very active. Greenwich, New York is kind of our home. Jackson Hole is kind of our home away from home. But the opportunity of best practices of content, of private digital and in person cannot be beat. So again, you go to angelorobles.com. It's all going to be there. You can learn about it, and it still could be an opportunity to come on board in being part of something intimate. I did want to bring up one other thing that I haven't promoted or spoken about as much recently. I don't know if trademarked is the right word, but like 7 or 8 years ago, Family Office Dream Team, given that I'm a big basketball guy, I think in 1992, the Olympic team, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, the Dream Team, of course. But what could I do in creating or revamping a family office and working on kind of some of these wargaming things, red selling that Michael mentioned, is to create a dream team. I no longer have that tab up on my website. There's enough on there already. It's good to keep things simple, but I absolutely believe in the concept of dream team. And you bet you that Michael is an integral part of that. So imagine in a consultative relationship after information is received, maybe just in 4-hour, 1 day, half day digital, 8-hour, full day digital, people like me, Michael, and others, a dream team. I'm the lesser of them, but really true, amazing people that I know, given my 20 years in the community and my activity around the world, solving your biggest problem, identifying problems you may not even see, and a little more positively, exponential opportunities that are out there that you may not notice. It's not cheap. gets the quality of what you're paying for, sometimes well over 100 years of collective knowledge and people that actually got shit done. Weren't just being a professor in a college, nothing wrong with that, but not actually taking action. Being in the trenches with entrepreneurs, with family offices, knowing what works, what doesn't work. So I'm very excited about that. And there are variations I've done that were in person as well. And again, you bet you, Michael is a big, big part of that. We are better together than we are individually because of the collective experiences and knowledge and resources that we each have. So we would love to work with you in a variety of different perspectives. Does simply have that chance to reach out. Angelo at angelorobles.com. Follow me on all socials. And again, the website is angelorobles.com. Michael, you've been more than a gracious guest, very incredible with your knowledge and your time. I don't know if you specifically had a closing comment or any way that people could follow you, whether you're on X or LinkedIn, but they would be foolish if they did not do that if you wanted to share that information.
Thank you, Angelo. I think the most important thing is thanks to the audience for having the patience and wherewithal to take some of your afternoon or evening to indulge the conversation, because I don't think any of these things are sound bites that Angelo had the intestinal fortitude to surface to the audience today or with me. Insofar as the easiest way to contact me, SedoGravitasPartners.com is the website for my company, our company, the company. And I'm on LinkedIn, Michael Irish, SedoGravitas. I think I'm the only one. So I would leave it at that. And hopefully some of you that have actually just been hitting me up over the last 2.5 hours almost will continue the dialogue there.
And again, Michael comes with my highest recommendation. It'd be great to collectively work together with Michael, but if you want to have an opportunity to directly connect with him and engage with him, he's incredible, and you're going to be in very, very good hands. It's Michael Irish, just like you would expect Irish to be spelled, like the country. That's founder and chief wargaming architect of SedoGravitas, and let me spell that. S as in Sam, EDOGRAVITAS Partners. Michael, what could I say? Again, it's been great to have you on. I look forward to continuing our friendship and working and collaborating together. We have so much to do. And do not, anyone out there, we're still in the spring, not even in June yet, and heading into the summer. This is absolutely, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an investor, if you're a family office, enjoy your time, travel, sure, but you cannot take your foot off the pedal. Look at what's happened around the world with AI, with deepfakes. Look at October 7th. Look at all the things happening. Do you think the world is just going to randomly take off this summer and pick back up again after Labor Day, the first week of September? It's not. Like, this is no time to take off. This is the time to take action, which is why I made the extra dedication to effectively, outside of a couple of 3-day weekends in Wyoming, there is no time off. I got things to do. I got events and things I'm hosting for my membership and work that I'm doing, hopefully in coordination with Michael and others in my dream team that could be valuable to many of you. On that note, thank you all. I hope you enjoyed it. Michael, again, thank you. And I look forward to the next time. Goodbye.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure.